The CIA's unbreakable lifelong contracts in the winter of 1947 in the shadowed corridors of Washington, D.C. A new order emerged from the ashes of war. The world had just endured the most destructive conflict in human history, and yet, an even more silent battle was about to begin. Deep within the government, a secretive organization began to take shape. It was not an army of uniforms, nor a body of politicians. It was an agency of shadows, bound by loyalty, secrecy, and the unspoken oath that would tether its members for life. The men and women chosen for this path were ordinary by appearance, but extraordinary by demand. They were asked to forsake the normal rhythms of life, to surrender personal desires, and to place the nation above all else. Each recruit signed contracts that few could ever read fully, for the pages were laced with codes, clauses, and promises no court could enforce. Yet in signing, they pledged their very existence to an organization that operated beyond transparency, beyond law, and beyond moral certainty. In the early days, some were exhilarated by the thrill of secrecy, the taste of influence hidden from the public eye. Others felt a cold shiver descend, recognizing the invisible chains they had accepted, binding them to missions that might never end. The agency demanded more than courage. It required the sacrifice of identity, the cloaking of emotion, the willingness to vanish into thin air. Names became meaningless. Lives became dossiers. Dreams became operations. The boundary between man and mission blurred. There were no celebrations, no parades, no medals handed in recognition, only whispers of loyalty, tested in silence, under the weight of unseen eyes. The first agents learned quickly that fear was a constant companion, but so too was a peculiar pride, a certainty that they were now part of something eternal. Letters to family could not speak the truth. Conversations with friends were veiled in half-truths and coded laughter. Even love was conditional, subject to the agency's unyielding rule. The mission always comes first, and the individual second. Over time, the recruits became veterans, hardened by clandestine operations and invisible threats that never left their shoulders. Every decision, every step, was measured against a standard known only to those within the agency's shadowed walls. The unbreakable contracts were more than paper. They were psychological bindings, forged in fear, loyalty, and the quiet certainty of lifelong service. Some would live their entire lives under this oath without ever being fully aware of all its obligations, yet the contract never let go. In coffee-stained offices and dimly lit safe houses, plans were drawn that could topple governments, destabilize regimes, or erase individuals from existence. The agents carried these plans as quietly as their own breaths, knowing the world outside would never understand the weight of such responsibility. History remembers battles, treaties, and leaders, but the quiet wars of the agency leave only shadows in the margins, stories half told, and lives half lived. Those who entered knew they would never return completely unchanged. A part of their soul now belonged permanently to the unseen machinery of statecraft. Even in sleep, some felt the tug of the contract, the invisible leash reminding them that they had pledged forever to an organization that would never release them. It was not merely duty, nor loyalty, nor fear alone. It was the sum of all, wrapped in a lifelong promise that could not be dissolved by resignation, age, or death. And so, the unspoken oath endured, binding generation after generation, an eternal contract inked in secrecy, silence, and shadows. For in the agency's world, freedom was a myth, and allegiance was a currency more valuable than life itself. The first chapter closes not with an ending, but with a question lingering in the mind. What price would a human pay when the contract owns their very soul? By the spring of 1948, the agency's network had begun to grow, spreading tendrils into every corner of global politics and intelligence. Its agents moved in shadows, unseen yet omnipresent, bound not by rank or title but by contracts written in secrecy and reinforced by fear. The bonds were invisible, yet their weight was heavier than any chain forged from iron. Each agent understood that stepping out of line was not merely a breach of duty, but a betrayal that could cost life, liberty, and legacy. The agency employed methods both subtle and insidious to maintain loyalty: financial incentives, threats, and the promise of unspoken prestige. Some agents were given wealth beyond imagining, while others were reminded, quietly, that disobedience could erase every trace of them from the world. Loyalty was tested constantly, often in ways that left no witness and no record. A single mistake could unravel a carefully constructed career, yet silence and obedience could elevate an agent into the inner circles of the unseen empire. During this period, the organization formalized its doctrine of lifelong commitment. No contract could be broken, no resignation would be accepted without consequences both immediate and enduring. The psychological grip was reinforced through training, surveillance, and subtle manipulation, leaving the agent isolated yet inseparably linked to the agency. Some recruits began to question the morality of their duties, confronted by missions that blurred the line between right and wrong. Yet the agency's invisible bonds were stronger than doubt, and fear, once planted, grew into a cage from which few could escape. Agents discovered that family, friends, and even lovers could become tools, or leverage, in the maintenance of absolute loyalty. Every personal connection was carefully monitored, and deviations from protocol were quietly, but effectively, corrected. The first generation of agents learned that the contracts were not merely legal documents, they were instruments of psychological domination. The promise of secrecy became a prison, where the mind was constantly occupied with the weight of hidden knowledge and unspoken obligations. Even outside active operations, agents were haunted by the contracts. Sleep was restless, conversations were measured, and the world felt simultaneously vast and intimately dangerous. By 1952, the agency had fully institutionalized the concept of lifelong allegiance. Those who had served faithfully were rewarded with access to classified knowledge and unseen influence, while those who resisted quietly disappeared from public and private life alike. It was said within the agency that no agent truly retired. Even if one left the field, the invisible bonds remained, the obligations, the secrets, the unbreakable oaths. Some agents found themselves trapped between loyalty and morality, duty and conscience, realizing that freedom was a concept only for those who had never signed. Every mission, every report, every coded communication reinforced the permanence of the contract, reminding each agent that they were now part of a legacy greater than themselves. The invisible bonds were both terrifying and seductive. They offered protection, power, and purpose, but demanded total surrender, leaving no room for regret or second thoughts. By this time, the agency had become a world unto itself, with codes and customs unfamiliar to any outside observer. Even history itself was incomplete, for many events were shaped by those who would never speak of them. And so, the invisible bonds endured, a silent force that linked generation to generation, an unspoken yet undeniable architecture of power, control, and devotion. The question persisted for those who entered: could a human heart truly survive the weight of loyalty that could never be broken? By the autumn of 1954, the human cost of service had become unmistakably clear. Agents, once young and idealistic, were now shadows of themselves, haunted by decisions that could never be undone. Missions demanded more than courage. They demanded the sacrifice of identity, the surrender of morality, and at times, the forfeiture of life itself. Families were left in ignorance, lovers in confusion, while agents navigated the delicate line between duty and conscience. Some were sent to foreign lands, under the guise of diplomats or businessmen, carrying with them secrets capable of altering the course of nations. The successes were invisible to the public, celebrated only in quiet nods behind closed doors, while failures were erased, as if they had never occurred. The unbreakable contracts exacted a psychological toll that few could articulate. Sleep was haunted by memories of actions taken in darkness. Dreams were punctuated by fear and regret, and reality often seemed a fragile illusion. Agents began to notice the subtle erosion of self. Personal desires, once vivid, faded under the weight of obligation. Happiness was measured in accomplishments that the world would never see, while guilt became a constant companion, reminding them that freedom had been exchanged for service to an invisible empire. By 1957, it was clear that the agency operated not only on intelligence, but on control over the human spirit. Every mission, every assignment, was a test of loyalty, obedience, and endurance, ensuring that the agent's bonds to the organization remained unbreakable. Those who questioned their orders found themselves isolated, subtly monitored, or reassigned to duties designed to remind them of their obligations. Even the act of leaving was impossible. The contract followed them, an invisible chain linking past actions to future consequences. Agents learned to conceal emotion as expertly as they concealed documents. Love became a calculated risk, friendship a potential liability, and family a network to be protected yet distanced from the truth. Every smile, every conversation, every gesture was measured, coded, and carefully curated to prevent exposure of the secrets they carried. The agency's doctrine emphasized that loyalty was not merely adherence to orders, but a complete alignment of thought, action, and identity. The human mind was both a tool and a battleground, where obedience and self-preservation clashed in silence and solitude. In clandestine meetings, agents shared their burdens in whispered tones, knowing that the world outside would never understand. They spoke of operations that had toppled governments, assassinations that had gone unrecorded, and intelligence that had saved or doomed countless lives. By 1960, the weight of secrecy had become generational. Some agents found themselves mentoring recruits, passing down not only techniques, but also the psychological legacy of lifelong commitment and sacrifice. The unbreakable contracts were more than agreements. They were instruments of control, shaping every aspect of life, from career to personal relationships, leaving no room for escape and few opportunities for reflection or reconciliation. Some agents succumbed to despair, others to obsession. Few found solace in the knowledge that their actions served a purpose larger than themselves, yet even that was tinged with ambiguity. Victory was silent, failure, invisible, morality, a shifting shadow in a world where loyalty to the agency outweighed all else. In the end, the true price of secrets became clear. It was not just lives, nor happiness, nor love, but the very essence of humanity itself. The contract demanded total surrender, and those who had signed would carry the weight until their last breath, and often beyond. The shadows lengthened, the whispers grew quieter, and the world outside remained blissfully unaware. Yet within the agency, the price of secrets was etched into every heart, a permanent reminder that loyalty, once given, could never be returned. And so, the chapter closes with an unspoken truth. Freedom is a luxury for those who have never signed, and the human soul, once pledged to the agency, is forever intertwined with shadows, silence, and the inescapable weight of lifelong commitment. By the dawn of 1962, the agency had transformed into an institution as formidable as it was invisible. Its structure was labyrinthine, built on secrecy, loyalty, and the unyielding enforcement of lifelong contracts. The organization's hierarchy was more than a chain of command. It was a fortress of shadows, designed to isolate, control, and protect. Agents were not merely employees. They were nodes in an intricate network where each decision, each communication, was meticulously monitored. Within this fortress, knowledge was power, but knowledge was also a weapon, carefully distributed to prevent rebellion or error. Few ever saw the entirety of operations. Most understood only what they needed to perform their duties. Nothing more, nothing less. The agency developed sophisticated methods to enforce obedience, surveillance, psychological profiling, and silent reminders of past failures ensured that loyalty was maintained without overt coercion. Safe houses, coded messages, and invisible couriers became the lifeblood of the organization, carrying secrets that could topple governments or erase entire lives. Agents were trained to navigate these shadows, moving unseen, thinking in codes, and acting with precision that few outside could comprehend. The unbreakable contracts were woven into every aspect of life. Resignation was an illusion. Even death did not always release one from the obligations, as families and legacies could still be implicated. By 1965, the agency had perfected the art of psychological containment. Loyalty was not merely encouraged, it was engineered, reinforced by fear, pride, secrecy, and the quiet certainty that the organization always watched. Agents who faltered were quietly corrected, reassigned, or sometimes removed entirely, leaving no trace behind, a reminder that the Fortress of Shadows tolerated no weakness and no defiance. Even within the inner circles, knowledge was fragmented, compartmentalized, and encoded, so that trust was absolute and every individual remained, by design, dependent on the collective machinery. The agency's influence extended beyond borders and governments. Alliances were carefully cultivated, enemies manipulated, and the invisible hand of the organization often guided world events without notice. Yet for the agents, the fortress was as much a prison as a protection. Isolation, secrecy, and the ever-present weight of obligation created a life lived in whispers, shadows, and coded conversations. By 1968, the agency had established a rhythm of operation that would endure for decades. Each generation of agents was inducted into the same unbreakable contracts, trained in the same shadowed halls, and bound to the same silent oaths. Mentorship became ritualized. Veterans passed on not only techniques, but the ethos of absolute loyalty, teaching newcomers that deviation was unthinkable, and that the fortress would endure long after any single individual faded. The agency became more than a workplace. It was a state within a state, with rules, hierarchies, and loyalties beyond comprehension. Those who entered understood that their lives were now inseparable from the organization, that freedom was forever constrained by obligation. Even the world outside, bright with its history, politics, and public triumphs, could not perceive the fortress. It was a shadow above shadow, a silent architecture of control, shaping lives, events, and the course of nations in ways never acknowledged. And so, the Fortress of Shadows endured, impervious, eternal, and absolute, binding generation after generation of agents to lifelong contracts written not in ink alone, but in secrecy, silence, and the human spirit itself. By the winter of 1970, generations of agents had lived, worked, and often suffered under the weight of unbreakable contracts. Few could remember life before the agency, and fewer still could imagine life after, for the organization's grip extended far beyond active service. Some agents retired in name only. Their pensions and accolades were granted, yet the invisible chains of secrecy remained, whispering in the mind, haunting the soul, reminding them that freedom was a myth for those who had signed. Families, though unaware, often felt the echoes of these hidden obligations. Spouses sensed absences, children noticed silence, and friends detected an unknowable distance that no explanation could bridge. The agency's reach extended even beyond death. Documents, memories, and the very legacies of former agents were meticulously controlled, ensuring that the contract's influence persisted long after the body ceased to exist. Many agents found themselves trapped between pride and regret. They had served a cause larger than any individual, achieved feats unseen, and yet sacrificed the simplest joys of life: intimacy, trust, and open expression. Some sought solace in the knowledge that their work shaped history, saved lives, and prevented catastrophe. Others were haunted by missions that had caused death, upheaval, or injustice, realizing too late that some actions could never be forgiven. By 1975, the agency had refined its most subtle tools of loyalty, the cultivation of dependence, the orchestration of trust, and the quiet assurance that the world beyond its walls would never understand, nor care, about the burdens carried within. Mentorship continued as ritual, passing down not only skills but also the unspoken philosophy that a life pledged to the agency was a life incomplete, yet complete in purpose, a paradox that shaped every choice, every thought, and every silent moment of reflection. Agents discovered that the contract demanded more than obedience. It demanded identity itself. Even those who attempted to sever ties found themselves irrevocably linked through knowledge, memory, and the ever-present risk of exposure. By the early 1980s, the agency's history had become a tapestry of shadows, woven with invisible threads connecting all who had served. Names, dates, operations, and secrets intertwined, forming a network beyond comprehension, yet rigidly maintained by unbreakable contracts. Few outsiders could grasp the scale or subtlety of this influence. The agency shaped governments, economies, and conflicts without acknowledgement, leaving the world unaware of the silent hands that guided destiny. As agents aged, the realization settled like dust upon their shoulders. Life had been spent in service, and yet, in service to what? Precisely, the nation, the organization, or the perpetual covenant of secrecy itself. The final lesson was unavoidable. The human spirit could endure extraordinary burdens, but freedom was forever constrained when pledged to shadows. The unbreakable contracts were not merely agreements, they were living entities, evolving, enduring, and demanding loyalty across decades and generations. Even now, in the quiet corners of the world, former agents live with the knowledge that part of their soul remains tethered. They walk among civilians, indistinguishable, yet forever marked by a covenant that cannot be dissolved, a presence unseen but omnipresent. And so, the story of the unbreakable contracts closes not with a conclusion, but with a question. What becomes of a life wholly pledged to secrecy, when the world will never know? And yet, the consequences will never fade? In the shadows of history, these lives endure, silent, invisible, and eternal, bound forever to the agency, its power, its secrecy, and the unbreakable oath that defines them until the end of days.